life isn't always go as you planned. I didn't become a psychologist to go into corrections, but they had a brand new diagnostic and classification prison in Georgia, about 40 miles south of Atlanta, but they didn't have a diagnostic and classification system where 10,000 inmates came through there a year. I had never had a drink at lunch in my life. I went to lunch with the Commissioner of Corrections. His name was Ellis McDougall. He was a Yankee operating down in the South. 2 martinis later, I was a warden. I didn't come to sell something. I wanted to talk about something and some experiences I've had in my life. I'm not from Kansas, but I have a real special interest in Kansas. My son, my only son, I have 2 daughters also, is the senior vice president of some firm called Mutual of Omaha. So he spends a lot of time in Kansas. His wife and 3 children are all Southerners, and so he has to commute to Atlanta quite often from Omaha. How I started speaking about capital punishment was another thing I hadn't planned on. One of the professors that Alex Holsinger, who's one of your professors, went to school with, she asked me if I'd do an interview on capital punishment for her students, and they recorded it. And it got a little emotional when I was explaining how executions work and what I did during an execution. And somehow that interview got on YouTube. The next thing I knew, I was speaking before Amnesty International. I was just trying to be a dean of a college of justice and safety. But from that point, I've been asked to speak several times, and I've been on national television about 5 times. And if you haven't seen it, we did a film for Discovery Channel, which is called The Last 24 Hours. You can go on Google and just Google The Last 24 Hours, Discovery Channel. It was filmed by an English firm. Discovery Channel asked them to do a non-political film on the death penalty. And it's probably the most realistic, hard-hitting film I've ever seen without politics involved in it. Which brings me to this topic. This is, to me, a non-political issue. It isn't a conservative issue, it isn't a liberal issue. We're talking about an issue that doesn't make a lot of sense as a human being. It doesn't make a lot of sense economically. I can't find many reasons that it makes any sense at all. But that's, of course, could be construed as a political view. But just getting sort of to the genesis of the death penalty is, you know, if you want to go all the way back to the cavemen, they didn't exactly have prisons and they didn't have options. And survival level, if somebody killed, and they killed them. If they threatened, they killed them. As Maslow's hierarchy of needs came into play, that was much later. First it was food and water and shelter, a long time before we got to truth and beauty and self-actualization. I hope we're there. There's a lot of reasons I've been given by lots of people, politicians, people of religious ilk, and others who've given me reasons to justify the death penalty. One, and I'll just go through these a little bit and then we'll go to the slides, but Is it a deterrent, or is it revenge, retribution? I've been given all those as a reason. And most people think of it in sort of either a very personal way, in that a member of their family was killed. And certainly if a member of any of my kids or grandkids were killed, my first thought would be revenge. But there is a real truism, I think it's a Chinese truism. If you seek revenge, dig 2 graves. One for the person you kill, and one for you, because it will destroy you. So I listened to those reasons, and a lot of people have quoted me Bible passages, almost all of them from the Old Testament. I don't think I ever remember anybody quoting me the New Testament when it came to death penalty. When you're Commissioner of Corrections, you get lots of advice. If you go to the Civitan group or the Lions group, or you go to church, or wherever you go, or a neighborhood party. When I was in Colorado, I lived just north of the Air Force Academy in a community with retired generals and colonels, and all of them gave me advice. But let's go through a few things, and then at the end, I want to tell you about my personal experience with the death penalty. Is it a deterrent? Does it really serve as a deterrent? That's a pretty good slide, eh? I didn't draw that myself, but if you took any training in behavior modification, the only punishment that really works to deter something is when it's sure and certain that it'll happen every time, and it happens very quickly after the behavior that you want to extinguish. It happens right after that behavior happens. I'm sorry, but the death penalty cannot meet any of those criteria. I think an average is somewhere around 16 years before. I never executed somebody who had just been that average 16 years. The first 2 I executed, they were 17 when they committed the crime, and they were 34 when I executed them. They were different human beings. If you want to just do it with research, there is no credible evidence anywhere that it serves as a deterrent, and probably for the very same reason that Skinner would say it wouldn't work in behavior modification. Did you know that 98% of prison murders, I mean, I've heard this a lot, well, as Commissioner of Corrections, you surely are for the death penalty because it would stop them from killing one of your staff or you. 98% of prison murders occur in states where they have capital punishment. So that didn't actually work as a deterrent. We've also found that in countries like Canada and all of Western Europe, since they did away with the death penalty, their murder rate has declined like that. Must be something to do with violence begetting violence. And my favorite story is a true story, that in England they used to hang pickpockets in the public square. And while they were hanging pickpockets, there were pickpockets out picking pockets of the people watching the pickpockets being hung. I mean, that would be funny if it weren't so sad, but that was really what went on. So I looked at everything I could find, and actually there had been some research that said it worked as a deterrent. But when you really analyze that research, it was really flawed research. And it was somebody trying to make a point and try to back it up with numbers. You statisticians do that all the time, don't you, Alex? Yeah, I know that. Well, the other thing is, if you execute somebody, it's a lot cheaper, isn't it? To keep them locked up for the rest of their life, that's got to be a lot cheaper. Well, there's estimates of as much as 20 times more expensive. I guess the best example is a state a little west of here in California. They have spent $5 billion on capital punishment to execute 19 people. Unfortunately, California just had a prop to abolish the death penalty and replace it with life without parole and take that money they would save and use it in worthwhile causes. But obviously the people of California liked the death penalty, and that proposition failed. I don't know if they liked the death penalty. I don't know if there was enough. I know there was a big effort. I don't know if it reached enough people to understand the situation. The most beneficial thing happened last year in the state of Connecticut. Now, you have to understand where I'm coming from, because as Commissioner of Corrections, I've actually worked with hundreds of legislators. In fact, the first time I appeared before the Georgia legislature as commissioner, my predecessor was that Ellis McDougall, who was from New York. And the chair of the Appropriations Committee was James Sloppy Floyd. And he didn't like Ellis because he was a Yankee. Well, I was born in Indiana, but I was about to tell Sloppy I was a Yankee. And so we rehearsed and re-rehearsed. And when I came before the Appropriations Committee, he said, "Dr. Ault, you come up here, and depending on your answers, we're going to decide whether corrections even gets a budget this year." He said, "Now, Dr. Ault, where are you from?" He didn't say boy, but that's what he meant. And I said, "Mr. Sloppy, sir, I wasn't born in Georgia, but I came as fast as I could when I heard about it." We got along fine.